I've watched a lot of high school football recently. I guess that's what happens when you coach high school sports. You now want to look at the competition and see, what makes the good teams good, the bad teams bad, and try to figure it out. And the beautiful thing for me is Paul uses sports analogies to get his message across. And so today I am going to follow in Paul's footsteps and use some sports analogies to get some points across that I think are very applicable. So on Friday, I watched the Division I AA football championship for the Northern California championship game. It was between Folsom and Archbishop Riordan or something like that. Riordan, yeah, from the Bay Area, right? So the one thing that these two teams had in common that is different than what we have here in Angels Camp is every one of their offensive line was probably an average of 290 pounds and 6'5". Ours, just to put it in context, if we're lucky, soaking wet and on stilts, we're probably 5'11" and 170 pounds. Okay, so I'm watching this game, and as I was watching the first quarter, I wondered, is there going to be any defense plays, right? It just seemed like one big play after big play after big play. And at the end of the first quarter, it was tied 13-13. Good game, right? First quarter, 13-13. Well, the second quarter was a different story. Archbishop just kind of took control. They had a running back that was 6'2", 235 pounds. Probably ran a 4.6, 4.7, maybe even a 4.5 40. I watched him run a 70-yard touchdown, outrun some of these little guys. I'm like, how does that happen? That has got to be illegal, And then I started thinking, well, how can I adopt him? You need a home? Come on. So if I start asking you guys to be host homes for kids that are 6'8" or bigger, please say yes. And anyway, so end of the half, it was 25-13. Folsom was down. It wasn't looking good. But what struck me at that point was the announcers. The announcers started to talk about Folsom. And they kept talking about their culture. And they kept talking about their winning traditions, that they've been in the state finals 8 times. And they just kept talking about it and talking about it, almost as if they expected the Folsom to win. And I'm watching the game and I'm thinking, man, they're going to have to do something in order to pull this out. And you know what happened? Folsom ended up winning 42-38. They lost their four-star recruit quarterback in the third quarter to, I think it was a broken collarbone. He took a shot. It was crazy. So the backup comes in, down. They shut him out in the second half, and they won the game. They didn't lose hope. They kept playing. You're probably saying, okay, what's the analogy here, Shawn? Well, the analogy is this. It's easy to sing praises, spiritually speaking, when we're on top, when things are going well. But what happens when we lose? What happens when we face difficult situations? What happens when we feel like we're faced with some insurmountable mountain in front of us? When life is difficult? How do you respond when you face defeat? That's the question. And really how we answer and how we respond when facing defeat is really critical, because we're not always going to end up on top. We're not always going to win. There's going to come a time when you realize that a participation award is nothing. But how do we keep going? You see, the Jews were singing praises to God after great victories in Exodus 15, Judges 5. They were super excited when they crossed through the Red Sea, when God delivered them. But this psalm seems to come after defeat. It seems to come in reflection to having lost and wondering why. It's believed that this psalm was written during the days of Hezekiah, when the Assyrian armies were making their way towards Jerusalem to take them over. And so today, here's what we're going to see. Here's what I believe that this psalm shows us, and that is, how do we move forward in faith after a defeat? We've all felt defeated, haven't we? We've all felt like giving up and throwing in the towel and wondering what to do. How am I going to keep going? And this is the one thing that I learned from this game is, what did Folsom do? They didn't panic. They built from that winning pedigree. They knew how to deal with adversity. And so today what we're going to see is really 4 things that can help us move forward when we face defeat. And the first one, what we're going to see that the psalmist does here, is he remembers the foundation from which he's building upon is firm. So when we face defeat, remember your foundation is firm. And so it says, to the chief musician, a compilation of the sons of Korah. And they say this, we have heard with our ears, O God, our fathers have told us, the deeds you did in their days, in days of old. You drove out the nations with your hand, but them you planted. You afflicted the peoples and cast them out, for they did not gain possession of the land by their own sword, nor did their own arm save them, but it was your right hand, your arm, and the light of your countenance, because you favored them. So the psalmist begins by remembering Israel's past victories, remembering the exodus from Egypt where God delivered them, where their victory came not because of what they did, but solely because of what God had done. And what he does here is he highlights God's faithfulness. He says, remember, victory after victory happened as we just kind of walked through the land and God gave it to us. What's interesting to me is the terms that he uses. He uses the phrase, we have heard. Well, what does that tell me? They didn't live it, but they heard about it. So somebody had to tell it to them. This is why sharing our testimony is so important. When we share our story about how God has delivered us, it encourages us to keep going, especially when we are facing defeat, especially when we're facing trying times, especially when we feel like we can barely keep our head above the water. You see, when we share our testimony of God's faithfulness, it's like God uses your hand to reach down and pick people up out of that and set them back on that firm foundation so they can see clearly and they can keep moving forward and not give up. And if you think about the children of Israel's story, their life was full of ups and downs, wasn't it? They didn't always make the right decisions. They weren't always on top. I just look at Abraham. Like, the dude tried to say his wife was his sister. Like, think about it this way. Guys, okay, you're there with your wife, the police are there to arrest you, whatever it might be, and you're like, tell your wife, hey, honey, just tell them you're my sister so they don't kill me. I don't care what they do about you, but just don't let me get killed. That's what he did in essence. Okay. You fool me once, shame on you. He did it twice. Twice he did it. Not the smartest move. Not the smartest move. You see, sometimes we make dumb choices and we end up not where we want to be or not where we should be. We have ups and downs in life. But the one thing that they could hold on to, it's the same thing that you can hold on to today. And that is the firm foundation that God has established through his faithfulness towards you because of his love for you. You see, at the end of verse 3, he says that you have favored them. He said, God, you did all these things. Why? Because you favored them. That word favored is kind of the same where we get our word grace from, because you have grace for them. So when they look back, they saw how God's gracious, faithful foundation was a place for them to move forward from. That we're beginning to see how it fit in their lives, even in the midst of trials and defeat. He goes on here in verse 4, and he says, "You are my king, O God. Command victories for Jacob. Through you we will push down our enemies. Through your name we will trample those who rise up against us. For I will not trust in my bow, nor shall my sword save me, but you have saved us from our enemies and have put to shame those who hated us. In God we boast all day long and praise your name forever." Selah. And that word Selah is meant there it means to pause. We need to stop and we need to reflect, especially in the face of defeat, especially in the face of discouragement, especially when we've failed, especially when we barely can get our head above water. But actually, especially when we've been victorious too. We need to stop and we need to pause and we need to look at and remember God's faithfulness. Because when we remember God's faithfulness, it has a tendency to change our tone. Notice that's what happened here in verse 4. It went from them to us. God, this is what you did for them. But God, this is what we need you to do for us. You see, if we're not to lose hope, we can't live in past victories. We can remember them, but we can't live in them. We need to move forward with the anticipation that God is still bringing victories to the people whom he loves. We need to move forward trusting the one who laid that firm foundation to us and for us. And what does he say? In God we will boast all day long and praise your name forever. They were able to worship even in the face of trials. Even in the face of uncertainty. Why? Because they stood on that foundation that said God is faithful. And they didn't clarify when he was faithful. They just stood on the fact that he was faithful. And it led them to worship. And worship leads to what? Worship leads to obedience. Think about it. The first time the word worship is mentioned in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 20 when Abraham and Isaac were going up the mountain. And, Abraham was told to sacrifice his son, his only son. What he tells the servants there is he says, we will go, we will worship, and we will return. You see, worship is actually more than just the songs that we sing. It's the life that we live in obedience to trusting God, even in light of the uncertainties of the things that we don't know. I mean, think about it. Abraham was going up that mountain to be obedient to sacrifice his son. You don't think he had questions? You don't think he wondered? What do you think about Isaac? Isaac's like, dude, Dad, fire, knife, sacrifice, something's missing. But in faith, what did Abraham say? If you read the story in the King James, it says that when asked that question by Isaac, Abraham responded by this: God will provide himself the sacrifice. Some translations say he will provide for himself because they want to try to help you understand. But it totally changes the meaning. Because God doesn't just provide for himself the sacrifice. No, God provided himself as the sacrifice for us. So Selah, pause. When faced with defeat, pause, look back at the firm foundation that God has laid for you. Then you'll be able to move forward in faith and in confidence that this is your time. That God's writing a testimony story for you. All this was done not because Israel deserved it, but because of God's love and grace for the people whom he loved. The second thing that we can learn, and it's another sporting analogy, is we need to learn from our defeats. We're not always going to win, and so we can learn from those things, right? In verses 9 through 16, it says, But you have cast us off and put us to shame, and you do not go out with our armies. You make us turn back from the enemy, and those who hate us have taken spoil for themselves. You have given us up like sheep intended for food. You have scattered us among the nations. You sell your people for next to nothing and are not enriched by selling them. You make us a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and a derision to those all around us. You make us a byword among the nations, a shaking of the head among the people. My dishonor is continually before me, and the shame of my face has covered me. Because of the voice of him who reproaches and reviles, because of the enemy and the avenger. You see, if we're going to move forward, we've got to learn from our mistakes. Well, what was their mistake? They had a vision problem. They had a vision problem. You see, what they thought was their defeats was a result of God giving them over to their enemy. Like I said, when you're winning, everybody's happy. I mean, that's the one thing you know about coaching. Like, you're the greatest coach in the world if you're winning. Like, everybody thinks you're great. The minute you stop winning, everybody's a critic. Everybody's casting a stone. Everybody's an armchair quarterback. Right? And yet, that's just life. When the problem is we have a vision problem. We're not seeing properly. Again, they thought their defeats were a result of God giving them over to the enemy, but really what we're going to see is that this was part of God's process to help them overcome and to see that God is in the process, not just at the final destination. They asked me this year to pray before every football game. They're like, pray that we win. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. Because, you know what? I'm just going to be honest. God doesn't care about football. He really doesn't. He really doesn't. If he did, he'd be a Raider fan, and then he'd be used to losing, and so everything would be okay. But he doesn't care about football. He doesn't care about basketball. He doesn't care about baseball. He doesn't care about hockey. He cares about coffee because he brews. But here's the thing. What do we see here? It's easy to point the fingers at someone else when things aren't going how you would like them to go, isn't it? Notice what they say. You have cast us. You do not. You make us. You have given us. You. That's how ridiculous it's got to sound to God, don't you think? I mean, that's how ridiculous it sounded to me. It's like a kid throwing a temper tantrum. And it's like a 2-year-old throwing a temper tantrum. It's cute at first, and then it's hysterical. You just laugh at him because they look so stupid. I just laugh. How can you not? And I wonder if God doesn't just laugh at us. You see, if God gave them the land by his grace and able to defeat them by their enemies, why has he now seemingly come to allowing them to face defeat? That's the million-dollar question. Yes, I can agree that it may have seemed like or looked like he has forsaken them because they weren't used to it. I understand what it's like to feel abandoned, or maybe that God doesn't care and isn't as interested in my life as I would like him to be. But I can tell you this, that that's not the case. God is more concerned than I even know that he is. You see, there's always something that we can learn from defeat. So what was it that they needed to learn, and what is it that we need to learn? And I believe it's this, that dishonor and disgrace brought them to a place of submission and intercession. They had to get to this place where they submitted to God's will and that they realized that they needed to pray and intercede and seek the Lord. You see, we need to understand and we need to learn that life is longer than what it looks like when we're facing the defeats that we face today. You see, we only get to seem to live to one defeat, and then we're like, oh no, the world's falling. But look back at your life. How many times have you failed? Look back at your lives. How many times did you feel like, oh, I'm never going to be able to get beyond this? But yet here you sit today. And God is still faithful. We got to be able to look beyond today's defeats. We need to understand that they are just temporary. And as long as we still have breath, God is not done with us. God is not done with the situation or the circumstances. You see, for Israel and most of us, the problem isn't with God's plan or faithfulness. It's that it's our confidence, our overconfidence, and our pride. And God uses defeat in our lives to teach us humility and dependence. And so today, are you feeling defeated? Are you blaming God for things that aren't going how you hoped they would go? Are you wondering, how are you going to get beyond this? I want you to stop, and I want you to be honest with yourself and with God. Stand on that firm foundation of grace, and don't give up. Don't throw in the towel, but ask God for the humility needed to learn from this defeat, that you might take that next step that will lead to you experiencing the victory that God has for you. You see, because the next step is this: don't give up, make adjustments. Every good sports team makes halftime adjustments. There's a reason there's quarters and there's a reason there's breaks, because you need to be able to make adjustments. You see, a good coach will plan out at the beginning of the week a game plan. But sometimes the other team has made a different game plan than what you game planned for. And so you need to be able to stop at halftime and be like, okay, my game plan's not working, so let's make our adjustments. They're doing this, so let us do this. That's life. But in order to make adjustments, you can't give up. You can't throw in the towel. And notice what he says here in verse 17. It says, all this has come upon us, but we have not forgotten you, nor have we dealt falsely with your covenant. Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from your ways. But you have severely broken us in the place of jackals and covered us with the shadow of death. If we have forgotten the name of our God, or stretched out our hand to a foreign god, would not God search this out? For he knows the secrets of the heart. Yet for your sake we are killed all day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. And you're probably saying, what adjustments did they make there? You didn't catch it, did you? They made a huge adjustment. They made an adjustment of what they focused on. You see, even though they couldn't make sense of the little defeats that they were facing, they kept going and they made the right adjustments. And again, that's why it's so important to take time and pause. Because when we do, we can regroup and we can make the adjustments that are going to lead to that victory for us to experience. Any good coach, if their team's down by 10, will tell them this: you do realize there's not one 10-point play. Meaning you're not going to get it all back in one play. You've got to make the adjustments and you've got to work. You've got to carry out the game plan, and then you will find success. And the point behind that is what you're trying to get your kids to know is that you don't want them to lose hope. You don't want them to give up or to give in. You want them to keep going. And you want them to allow those failing moments or those defeats, where the things that they did that got them down, to motivate them and drive them to keep going and see that if they do the things that they're asked, they can experience good things. You see, Romans 8:36 quotes verse 22, the sheep part, to show us that nothing can separate us from the love that God has for us, not even defeat. Romans 8:37 tells us this, that we are more than conquerors. So Romans 8 says that we are like sheep to the slaughter. Romans 8:37 says we're more than conquerors. Are you beginning to see the adjustment? Let me keep going. It doesn't say that we are victims. It doesn't say God can't be glorified in defeat or that defeat is the end of the story. It's not what it says. You see, when the proper adjustments are made, what once looked like defeat turns into a glorious victory. You see, Israel's defeat didn't mean that God loved them less. It meant that he was allowing this to happen in their lives so that they could see that God was carrying out a purpose that was not known by them and only known by him. They had a focus problem. The adjustment was they needed to change what they were looking at. Let me read to you Isaiah 53, the psalm or the prophecy of the suffering servant. Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrow and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. And he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? And he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken, and they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Yet he shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he is numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. What was the adjustment? Who were they looking at? They needed to look to Jesus. Now think for a moment when the exiles in Babylon read this psalm. I wonder if when they got to this point, they didn't say Isaiah 53. They would have known the Old Testament. They would have known that, hey, our eyes were focused over here, but now we need to focus them on this suffering servant. You see, when we are faced with defeat, we need to make adjustments that say this: I'm not the victim, but Jesus is the victor. And when we make an adjustment, what we will see is this, that Jesus embraced the pain of your defeats. Did you catch that? A man of sorrow, acquainted with grief. Whose grief? Yours. Every pain that you feel because of defeat, Jesus understands it. He has borne our griefs. He has carried our sorrows. Every tear that fell from your eyes, he's caught them in his hands. And he felt the pain. He understands the grief. He understands the shames. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquity. All those wounds you've had to carry for so long, he knows what they feel like. By his stripes, we are healed. Not we might be, we are. Why? Because every bit of pain that you felt, every wound that you've ever had, when he took those lashes on his back, they weren't just lashes for the sake of lashes. They were a representation of the pain that you would have to experience. And Jesus says, I understand what you're going through, and I am going to be your healing. Though you feel like sheep before the slaughter, Jesus said, I was the lamb that was slaughtered. I understand what you're feeling. You see, Jesus embraced the pain of your defeats, and he's now rooting for you to keep going, that you could experience the victory that he has for you, that you could experience the healing that he's making available to you, so that you won't quit, that you won't give up. Even though you're down by 10, you're going to put one foot in front of the other until you cross the plane and you win the prize. You realize that God is doing something even in the background when you don't see it. The adjustment is when you're feeling defeat, focus on Jesus. Focus on Jesus. And then in verse 23 through 26, we're going to see that they had to move forward in faith. It says, awake, why do you sleep, O Lord? Arise, do not cast us off forever. Why do you hide your face and forget our affliction and our oppression? For our soul is bowed down to the dust. Our body clings to the ground. Arise for our help and redeem us for your mercy's sake. You're saying, well, how did they move forward in faith there? Notice what they say. God, redeem us. We've blown it. Don't leave us alone. Strengthen us. Why? For your mercy's sake. Do what you're doing for you, not for us. They went from you did, to now, God, do this. Redeem us. And it's interesting because in verse 23, the word for Lord is the word Adonai, when he's speaking about God. And this is the name that declares that he is the owner and master of all, including nations and people and trials and defeats, pain and sorrow. You see, to move forward in faith requires boldness and courage to trust Jesus with our defeats, to not give in, to not throw in the towel, but to say, God, I don't know how you're going to bring about victory, or I don't know how you're going to bring about healing, but I have to trust you, and I'm going to move forward in faith that you are going to redeem me through your mercy's sake, that you're going to do what only you can. You see, and the psalmist came to this place where he knew that he could trust God to handle the defeats that he was facing. But he also knew that he could use those same defeats to bring about great victory in his life. You see, all the pain and sorrow that we've experienced in life, they don't go wasted. God uses them, gives value to it. The psalmist was at that place where Job was, when Job said, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. Job 13:15. You see, we can't explain life's tragedies. We can't. They don't make any sense. They are difficult. They are painful. The things that you feel, and I am not trying to say that they don't hurt. No, what I'm saying is they do hurt. They are painful. But there's a God who understands those who bore them and who is there for you, rooting you on, saying, come back to that firm foundation where I delivered you. Come back and don't give up, but learn from those defeats. Make the adjustments. Change what you're looking at, and then move forward in faith. You see, when we face life's tragedies, we need to remember that Romans 8:28 is still in the Bible. And we know that in all things, or that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. He didn't say all things were good. So you need to understand that. That's a key point there. All things aren't good, but God can take even not good things and make something good out of it. Some of the most beautiful pieces of art come from broken pieces. God's in the business of making mosaics. You see, you may look or feel like you're a sheep before the slaughter. That might be how you're feeling. But you know what? In God's sight, you know what you are? You're more than a conqueror through him who loves you. That's how God sees you. So let's not lose hope when we're facing defeat. We're all going to get there. Let's realize that there's not a 10-point play. But let's go back to our firm foundation of God's faithfulness. Let's learn from our mistakes. Let's adjust what we're focusing on, and let's move forward in faith. Faith that says, God, you do work all things together for good. I don't know how, because I'm not seeing it, but you say I'm more than a conqueror. Let's move forward in faith with a boldness, a victorious boldness. You see, the pain of defeat is real. But what's just as real is that Jesus has felt all that pain. And he is committed to walking with you towards the victory that he has prepared for you because he loves you. So know this. The trials are real. The defeats hurt. The pain is so hard sometimes to deal with. But we have a God who loves us and understands what we've gone through. And he's wanting to walk with you towards the victory as he takes what Satan meant for bad and use it for good. As he works all things together for good to those who love God. As he takes us from defeat to victory. As we say, God, I'm not giving up, but I'm going to move forward holding on to you and trusting that you are not done writing the story.